The Brewhouse was created to capture and share with you the long history of the Genesee Brewery, but the brewery itself isn't half as interesting as the beer and the people who make it. Visit GeneseeBrewhouse.com. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us. This is the Rochester Press Box presented by the Genesee Brewhouse. Nice to have Greg Keagle back with us. Talk a little baseball. Mike Catalana co-hosting.
Good to be here.
Pat Duffy in uniform.
Yep, Bills camp coming up this week. You always look for those small school guys that'll make a difference, and the man, the myth, the legend, don't cross him, Arthur Moats. That's right.
The man, the myth, the legend.
Well, you don't cross the Moats. Are you thinking about it?
Yeah.
Stop
I'm leading right back into Greg.
What do you always have to mention with Arthur Moats?
Well, he destroyed Brett Favre's starting streak, obviously. I wasn't going to, but you had to be the hack, so that's fine. Be the hack. Yeah, that's cool.
Greg, we're knee-deep into the second half of the baseball season, post-All-Star break. Right now the big thing is, are you a buyer or a seller? How do you see this all playing out?
I think what makes the difference and determines, whether you buy or sell is really how your team is made up. If you're made up of a bunch of young stars and you think that you have a bright future and you're close, you might be willing to just miss the playoffs to not sell off the farm. But if you're close and there's some parts that can be moved and it also depends on what market you are. New York has to win, and so New York will do whatever it takes. Boston has to win, so, they may be in a different position. They may
be willing to bail earlier because like Minnesota a couple of years ago, they were buyers and they were sellers.
Yeah, and in the crystal ball, nobody has the crystal ball. They made movies over Moneyball, right? People trying to make analytics be what baseball is. And baseball's made in the clubhouse. It still is, and it always will be. So you don't know what chemistry is happening. How magical was what happened in Anaheim with what was a tragedy and it turned into something, very special for a clubhouse. And we don't know what it's like to feel that. And so, you look at, I was doing a little bit of research looking at, who is the outsider looking in and who might be able to make the playoffs. And, they say that Anaheim has a puncher's chance. And as I said, if you've got a story in the clubhouse, you never know, what you'll get.
Boston Strong was a good example.
Yeah,
absolutely.
You can be a little bit of both, but, I'm thinking in terms of you can be a seller in one perspective where you say, I've got a veteran guy that teams are going to want. But I also know I got a guy we want to get more at-bats who we think can still help us, and you can still do well. The issue then is buying too, right? Because now you've got to say, yeah, we sold this guy off. We have a young guy to go in his place, but are we going to go for that extra pitcher? Are we going to go for that extra outfielder? I think the teams that are going to be there are always going to buy, right? They may not be buying a lot, but they're always going to buy. But I think it makes sense to sort of look at it as both. And the wild card, obviously, if you can keep fans interested, it's hard to be a total seller, but it does depend on where you are. If you're in some cities, you look at a team like the Mets, right? Could they sell? They have talented guys that you can sell, but some of that may be better off for a franchise like that to wait till the offseason.
Well, but the wild card brings up what Bill talked about, how these teams are seeming to become sellers sooner and sooner and sooner, right? Like now that games matter that much, where, if I was 5 games out 10 years ago, well, that doesn't matter how much of a chance do I have, where now I'm going to catch a team that might be 2 or 3 games ahead of me that's in a completely different division, right? If you sell early to a team that's looking to buy early to make up those games that they wouldn't have had to a couple of years ago, well, you're setting the market. You're probably getting the best deal, right, when you swing it first. So I have the best chance to get a return on what I'm selling if I'm doing it early, and I think that's why we're seeing it earlier and earlier every year.
It's funny, and the best teams seem to be making the biggest deals. I think Chapman going to the Cubs. I think Verlander going to Houston. And the teams that are going to make the biggest splash this year, it seems to me, are going to be the Yankees and the Dodgers.
Yeah, both teams are obviously leading their respective divisions. I think that the Yankees certainly need a pitcher. I really do. I think that they need, Mike pointed out that depending on what your team needs, I think the Yankees need some kind of stability other than CC in the rotation. I think that, his body could break down. You never know what happens with injury. And I just think that you need leadership, in a rotation.
This is the Rochester Press Box, presented by the Genesee Brewhouse. Buffalo Bills are next. The Press Box is brought to you in part by Bay & Goodman Pizza, a local Rochester favorite. Corner of North Winton and Browncroft, Bay & Goodman Pizza. Hi everyone, welcome back. Thanks for joining us. This is the Rochester Press Box, presented by the Genesee Brewhouse. Mike, a couple weeks ago we were talking about McCoy and how much he had left in the tank. It seems to me there's like a bigger picture league-wide with these running backs and what to do with them because they age out so quickly that they need to get paid earlier. Ezekiel Elliott's talking about a holdout. You view this position so much differently than every other part of the football team now, don't you?
Yeah, I think I always say you need a running game. You don't necessarily always need a running back. But what are you going to do if you're Dallas and you've made that commitment? He is an exceptional player. But then again, we thought Todd Gurley was, and he's banged up early, and nobody knows exactly what's going to happen. The Bills have been an exception in a way. They still have a guy who is thought of in those cases with McCoy as been an exceptional player, but he hasn't done that in the last year and a half on the field. I was looking at the cap numbers. The Bills have been in the top 5 in cap number for running back position ever since McCoy's been there. Now, next year, if you look at next year, that number drops way down. Surprisingly, New England, I was looking at the cap numbers, has been in the top 6 for running back position percentage of the cap over the last 5 years. But they spread it around. They have a series of guys all making between $2, $3, $4 million. Now, not to be a surprise, but when you have that quarterback, you can make that position work. I think that's the way to do it. You're not as dependent on one guy. But again, if you have an exceptional player who can do so much for your team, I see the reason to do it. But, you know, the Jets are now going to be in that spot. Mm-hmm. They got a ton of money invested in that one guy. If you look at recent history in the league, it isn't the ability, it's the ability to run, not just relying on the one guy.
So Pat, you run a football team now. How do you view the position? What do you do? How do you invest in it?
Well, I think to go further than Mike said, I don't think you do invest in it anymore because the league has changed more than the position has changed. If you go back and watch football from the late 80s, early 90s, the golden running back years, right? We got Thurman Thomas and Barry Sanders and Bo Jackson. I can go on and on and on. Those guys were superior athletic athletes, right? Not to be redundant, but they were better, more athletic than anyone else on the field. Well, defensive coordinators and general managers realized I can go find guys that can play like this to play the other side of the ball. I mean, if you looked at a linebacker and a running back side by side 25 years ago, there was a difference. If you look at a running back and a linebacker today side by side, there isn't much of a difference. They're both as athletic. The only difference is the linebacker could bench 100 pounds more and maybe run faster than that running back can. The way that the game is today, I don't think that you need to pay for a running back. And you brought up the Patriots, spread it around. When a guy like Mike Gillislee can be your feature back for 3 weeks and then you never hear from him ever again, that says something.
Yeah, but they do spread it around that way, and they have guys who have pretty defined roles, and they find a way to make them effective. Again, that's the entire system, but you don't see them ever investing. You know, they drafted Sony Michel relatively early. He'll be that guy for a few years, but I would be stunned to see him, even if he did well, New England invest in a big contract with him. They'll move on and go to the next guy. They'll use him for the 3-4 years, and they'll move to the next guy.
Greg, it strikes me that some of these guys, maybe all of them, are wasting time in college. I don't know that there's a solution to that, but if you've got that limited a lifespan and you're spending 3 years running the ball for, in the Pac-10.
Yeah, I mean, I think that brings up a good point. I think conference and what type of athlete you see on the other side of the ball will determine how long you can stay in college. If you're in the SEC, you're facing NFL defensive linemen every week, right? I think that, you bring up a good point about the change in the position, and, now you see guys have to be able to catch the ball, consistently out of the backfield. And I think that's a great point about the body type and what you see. And, I just don't, I agree with, both sides of it. I think that you're going to see a different type of athlete. And I think that the schemes and having a running game is probably more important than the actual player.
And the death of the featured back, perhaps.
Yeah. Could be.
This is the Rochester Press Box. We're presented by the Genesee Brewhouse. Like it or not is next. Here's the Press Box trivia question, brought to you by Market View Liquor, where exceptional customer service meets an extensive selection. Jefferson Road at 390. Here's the Press Box Trivia answer, brought to you by Market View Liquor, where exceptional customer service meets an extensive selection. Jefferson Road at 390. Welcome back, and thanks for joining us on the Rochester Press Box, presented by the Genesee Brewhouse. Like it or not, we got baseball players being thrown at, but for different reasons. We got David Freese, comes up after the previous guy hits a home run, pitcher drills him the back. Mm-hmm. You've got Marisnik, who slid hard into a catcher the week before, and he gets hit the next week in retaliation. Are both of these justifiable acts?
The home run one isn't. I mean, I get you're backing up your boy, going hard, but I never understood if a guy trots too slow or a guy hits a home run and you're going to drill him again. You threw the pitch. That was your fault. What are you doing? I know they're unwritten rules, but if you guys, you pitchers, you psychos over there, if you would not mind just writing these unwritten rules down so I could follow what is and isn't okay this week, I would really appreciate it, because it's your mistake. Why are you making this innocent guy afterward? Hey, I'm going to play some baseball. Oh, this is the most painful thing I felt in a very long time, and I did nothing wrong. Nothing.
I always felt that. I turned to that. I said, that particular act, thrown at the next guy because someone hit a home run, most cowardly act I can think of in sports.
Okay, look at him. I can't wait.
No, this is a touchy subject. No, it isn't the best time to do it. It really is not the best time to hit a guy, and it's never condoned. It's not asked to be done, and it's not rewarded. It's actually looked down upon. I've seen borderline fights between other position players and a pitcher who might have done such a thing on their own team, because the batter has to go in the box and get hit the next day because now I have to protect my left fielder who just got smoked on a ball that he had nothing to do with. Unfortunately, they're not so unwritten, some of these rules. I think we all know when the right time is to maybe go a little high and tight. It's one of the only ways. There's no contact in baseball, supposedly. And I think that it's just there is a little bit of a protect my guy mentality that I think is allowed, and but it's not at the head. That's like inside. I mean, there is some of it. Do you see any less of it in the National League than you see in the American League? No. You
but
don't.
The one with the Phillies, he gives up the pinch home run, and then it's David Freese, and Hector Neris didn't even mess. He threw at his head, basically. I mean, he threw inside. It was terrible.
Well, if you didn't David Freese, it might have been a little bit better for him.
You called me the hack?
He laughed. You heard the laugh.
Greg, like it or not, and we're seeing this in the AL East now with Eovaldi and Severino, the idea of turning a quality starting pitcher into a reliever.
I don't think I like it. I don't think it's a big difference to go from a starter to a reliever. I think it's a little bit more difficult to do it the opposite because of the length and how you have to stretch yourself out. So it takes a little bit longer to take a reliever and turn him into a starter. You've got a starter that was used to it. He may not be as effective coming back, the next day or 2 or 3 days in a row. That may take a little bit of time, but not nearly as long as if you flipped it and you were trying to turn a reliever into a starter.
The concern is how much does it take out of him? I mean, both these guys are coming off injuries. Is it more or less of a risk to have him pitch every day as opposed to every 5th day?
I mean, guys are throwing every day, even if you're not a starter. So, you're playing long toss on certain days. It's not like just because you're not pitching in the game that you're not out throwing, and sometimes maybe throwing close to 100%. As a starting pitcher, there's 2 to 3 days throughout the week where you're throwing 100% or pretty close to it. I mean, a bullpen day might be 75, 80%, but it's also, trying to gear up to be ready to throw 5, 6, 7 innings as opposed to go out and let it fly for 1. And there are times in 1 inning it might be 5 pitches. So, even though that may still take some toll on your body, 5 pitches is just not a lot of work compared to 75, regardless of how much trouble you're in those 75.
All right, so it's going to work out for both of them, right?
We'll see.
This is the Rochester Press Box, presented by the Genesee Brewhouse. Unfinished Business is next. And now here's this week's MVP Experience Stat of the Week, brought to you by Sport Clips, where it's good to be a guy. No appointment ever needed.
Unwrap a sweet escape at Dunkin' with Hershey's Cookies and Cream and Heath flavors in your favorite espresso drinks. And make it even more delicious with a $2 medium latte or cappuccino between 2 and 6 p.m. America runs on Dunkin'.
Welcome back. Thanks for joining us on the Rochester Press Box, presented by the Genesee Brewhouse. Unfinished Business brought to you by Dunkin'. America runs on Dunkin'. Pat.
Bills camp kicks off on Thursday, and this is the first time, I'm guessing, in the history of the Buffalo Bills franchise where we have no idea what the depth chart for wide receiver looks like. Like, literally, no idea. You got two name receivers coming back. Robert Foster, the undrafted free agent, and Zay Jones, former second overall pick. You got two pretty big free agents that you signed, Cole Beasley and John Brown. 4 guys, and not anybody who says they're in the know can slot where these guys are going to go. Let's put it this way. Robert Foster could be your number 1 receiver on opening day. He could also be your number 4 receiver. As a matter of fact, he could be your number 5, because there's another guy that all the football nerds get really excited about. A guy named Duke Johnson, coming from the Canadian Football League, played major college football, had some off-field issues, had to go rehab himself up north, and now he's on the roster. 5 guys. 5. And not a single person can honestly look me in the face and tell me where any of them are going to fall. And what's even weirder is Foster and Brown are pretty similar football players. So is one subbing for the other? Do you have ideas in doing that? I'm going to be honest with you. I don't have a lot of faith in this team's coaching staff when they coach the offense. Nate Peterman starting last season, let's put it that way. I'm not convinced that this coaching staff themselves know, walking into the opening day camp, where those wide receivers fall on the depth chart opening day.
Greg, you're up.
I think that at times we get too caught up in what's a written rule, what's an unwritten rule, whether or not it's polite to do something in sports, whether it's baseball, whether it's football, whether it's tennis. At some point, you can't take the competitive nature out of a player. And I think that, team sports especially, being able to work together, being able to, have some kind of team chemistry still trumps everything else. I don't think that whether it's money, whether it's contracts, whether it's the city, at the end of the day, what happens in the clubhouse stays in the clubhouse. And that pretty much determines who is the champion.
I think they're better unwritten, because if they're unwritten, you could justify anything you do out there.
I think to your point that there is something to be said about that. But I think that a lot of it, like I said, I think that, these unwritten rules still fall back to the Sandlot days, when we used to throw a bat up in the air and you'd put your hand to see who hit first. Nobody came up with that rule. I can't find the book on, the directions for that. Some kid just decided to do it. So, competition is better when it's just pure.
There's a golf event going on this week here in Rochester. It's called the Danielle Downey Classic. It is the Symetra Tour. Now, that's basically the minor league for women's golf. And look, I'm not going to sit here and tell you it is a must-see. You got to be out there. It just doesn't draw fans that way. But I got a chance to be out there for Pro-Am and see the players and the job Mike Vidala does to run the tournament. They run it as well as any. Typical of Rochester, the players say it's the best stop, or they're treated as well or better than any other place. And these are talented young women playing. Megan Oslin's the woman that we played with. I got a chance to be on the course with her when she had a double eagle by herself, a 2 on a par 5. Never been on the course to see that, so that was cool to see. She's been on this tour for 4 years, played at San Jose, trying to work her way around, and these girls travel as a group in many cases because they make virtually no money. And I think Greg could relate. It's more like the low minor leagues, and then trying to move up, you got to do your best. And then there's a point where you say, am I going to make it to the next level to make a living, or do I just say I played this sport for a while and then moved on? These are talented young women. They are the best of the best right below the tour. It is a worldwide competitive thing, and it's hard to make it, but they're trying. So try. If you get a shot, you go out there. It's at Brook Lee. It's a really nice event. It's not expensive, and it helps good causes here in town. There is talent here in town for the LPGA or future LPGA, just not what we used to see at the Wegmans.
You didn't even bring up the hardest part about working that tour. They had to play golf with you for a day.
They did. They really enjoyed it.
That is really loving the game. This is the Rochester Press Box, presented by the Genesee Brewhouse. Unfinished Business, brought to you by Dunkin'. Greg, thanks for coming in. We love having you.
Always a pleasure.
Mike, Pat, you guys, thanks for watching us. We'll see you again next week on the Rochester Press Box.